iPad Pro M4 just released out in the market, and it's a powerful machine, or a very powerful machine. But does it worth? Let's talk about it. So recently, a few days ago, Apple had an event of specifically designed for the iPad without introducing the new software but new physical hardware. So Apple just introduced the new iPad mini and iPad Pro M4. Eventually, they are designing the iPad for the betterment, and actually by the betterment I mean the new chipset, the new sleek designs, and also the new powerful machineries all over around the world, which can specifically beat some of the laptops and then some heavy end devices, but in the thinnest design. But I mean, there is still an iPad. What we can do onto it. Beside this all, let me introduce to you the new iPads. So Apple just introduced iPad mini with the M2 chipset, and also with the two new sleek you could say inches. So one is of 11 inches and another one is of 13 inches with the new chipset M2, but the most powerful. So earlier they were using M1 chipset for their iPad mini. Now they have introduced the M2 chipset for their iPad mini, which is specifically a powerful bump onto iPad mini, and the pricing is also kind of ridiculous. So they have introduced the 11-inch model in $599 with the baseline of 64 gigabytes, and the 13-inch model in the $799 with the 128 gigabytes model. Beside iPad mini, let's move on to the Apple's high-end peak devices known as the iPad Pro, and there are a lot new things to talk about. So the new iPad Pro M4, specifically M4 name has been given. So they have introduced the new M4 chipset only for the iPad till now. They will introduce it in the laptops as well, but currently the iPads are the only device which are currently in using M4 chipset, which is pretty powerful machineries with all new sleek designs. So iPad M4 11 inches are few of the thinnest device Apple has ever made. So it's just 5.3 mm. And talking more about it, iPad Pro M4 13 inches is just 5.1 millimeters thing, or the slimmest product Apple has ever made. One of the time Apple has made iPod Nano, and this iPad is actually more slim than that iPad Nano. Pretty straight. But who told them to decrease the thinness of the iPad? Actually, no one, and it will definitely affect the strength of that particular iPad. But beside all these things, there is a huge massive update of the M4 chipset. But what we'll do with that M4? Apple has not introduced the newest iOS for their iPads, but the new chipset M4 is more powerful than any other chipset Apple has ever made. But where you will use that? Okay, so let's take an example. You have Bugatti Chiron with you with a top speed of 489 kilometers per hour, and from 0 to 100 it reaches in less than 2.2 seconds, which is actually straight. But there is a condition. You have to ride that Bugatti Chiron in a mountainous area where not the proper road systems are being built, but your house is at the top of the mountain, and you have to go from your house towards the market, which is actually down, or you could say in the valley. So how you will ride that Bugatti? Eventually, if you started riding with not a proper roads, but at least roads are built to ride that Bugatti, you started the Bugatti with the top speed of 200 kilometers per hour. But could you able to run it for a longer period of time? Or could you able to run the Bugatti with its top speed? So you have a Bugatti with the top speed, with the frequent speed, with the highest speed one could ever achieve in any of the car systems. But where you will use that speed? I mean, you cannot use that specifically in that mountain, not even in the city areas as well. 500 kilometers per hour is not a joke. The same rule is applied for Apple as well, or specifically for iPads. I mean to say that they have all new M4 chipset with the high and powerful machineries. You could run anything out of it, any kinds of game, any kinds of software, any kinds of video editing, thumbnail editing, or whatever you want to do it, you could. But at the end, it is an iPad. What you will do for the software, you have changed the hardware for from M2 to directly M4, not going with the M3 to directly for the M4, are hardest spec bumps. But what you will do with the softwares out there, at the end it is using the iPad OS, which is actually the bigger model of iOS, you could say. At the moment, you cannot do a high-end video editing, you cannot do a high-end graphics designing, a color grading, or something like that, because there's not much software built it for the iPad specifically for that M4 chipset. It's a very powerful chipset, but where you will use it, there's no way of using. And also for the pricing one, so their newest, the high-end 13 inches model with 2 terabytes of storage and also 16 gigabytes of RAM is actually of $3,600, which is more than newest released Apple Vision Pro. Does it worth it? Actually, if you have an iPad M1, so actually if you have an iPad Pro M1, which is a highest powerful machine at that time, not currently, but that time, there is nothing in the iPad OS which can be done by the M4 but not by the M1. Both can do all the things which is dedicated for the iPad OS. Yeah, especially there are power spec bumps, there is powerful performance, but there's nothing in the iPad OS which could be done by M4 but cannot be done by M1, which is insane. You have just introduced M1, M2 and directly M4, but there is not any software updates which you could relate with that powerful chipset. So all this new things, all about the M4 chipset, about the thinnest design, about reducing the battery for the extra performance, and that chipset is also consuming less power than M1, M2, M3. But all this thing does not matter until you introduce the newest operating system for the iPad. At the end, it is just an iPad, nothing else. Just an iPad. So many people say about you could do much of the work in iPad, but it's actually wrong. Much of the work and higher graded work, they have a difference in that, and that difference is very huge. And that difference also work in terms of iPad. I hope you guys enjoy watching this video. We'll meet you in the next one. Until then, keep vibrating just like it was.